The Week in Space. CBS News coverage of the mission of Gemini 9. This morning, the reentry and recovery of astronauts Stafford and Cernan. Now reporting from the CBS News Space Center in New York, Walter Cronkite.
Good morning. The Gemini 9 should be in its last hour of flight, just about this second. It should be landing in the Atlantic, downrange from Cape Kennedy, just a few seconds after 10 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, and it's now just a few seconds after 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. It will come down after some 45 revolutions and 3 days in space, having traveled 1,125,000 miles. And with Lieutenant Commander Eugene Cernan, the 32-year-old pilot of the spacecraft, having made a 2-hour and 5-minute spacewalk. Everything seems to be going very well on this last revolution of the Earth, and has been going so ever since Cernan and his command pilot, Tom Stafford, were awakened about 5 hours ago. They each had a fair night's sleep, 4 or 5 hours each, which isn't as much as they had planned, but apparently they had rested a great deal during yesterday's flight after Cernan's strenuous spacewalk. And they both claim to be in good condition this morning. Everything aboard the spacecraft is functioning properly. They have stowed all of their equipment and are preparing for the Retrofire, which should come some 25 minutes from now. CBS News color coverage of the recovery of Gemini 9 will continue in a moment.
You get fresh, potent vitamins in one a day, because one a day is double sealed. Each tablet gives you the vitamin equivalent of 3 well-balanced meals, like these. That's all the vitamins a healthy person normally needs to take. The vitamins you may be missing, unless you eat right. Double sealed. One a day brand, multiple vitamins. The pill for people who don't know what they're missing.
A little earlier this morning, Stafford and Cernan adjusted the orbit of their spacecraft, and in so doing used up the last of their regular supply of fuel, and for controlling their attitude just before Retrofire will be on their so-called Volkswagen tank. That is an extra tank that they turn on of the fuel for their attitude control system. There is plenty of fuel available. Their new orbit is 180 by 168 miles, a little lower than it was when they were in a nearly circular orbit of 185 miles. They lowered the orbit to give them a slight glide angle on their reentry, or improve that glide angle, and with the lifting factor built into the Gemini spacecraft, they hope to, as they told Captain Hartley on the aircraft carrier Wasp, they hope to put the Gemini right down his smokestack. At least they hope to get within 4 miles. The Gemini's lift factor is built so that they can get within a 5 mile of the target, they hope. There is a much larger footprint, as it's called, where the Gemini could land. During every one of these recovery operations, we talk a lot about that landing footprint, something perhaps we should explain a little before we get into Retrofire this morning. Jack Siegel over at IBM, using some of those computers of his, can give us some help with this landing footprint.
The Earth, and you'll see one of the first things that is done is the orientation of the spacecraft so that the thrusters in the rear, the reentry system, is pointing in the direction of travel, so the thrust can be used to slow that velocity. Now let's stop the spacecraft for a moment and fire. We can do this with a computer, as you see. You'll see a portion of the spacecraft jettisoned and the path traced. The new orbital path would occur as a result of firing the retro rockets. This path intersects the Earth, so they're now committed to a reentry. They've lowered the far point of their orbit. However, when they encounter the sensible atmosphere, in effect, at 400,000 feet of the air, they will then have the friction of the air, and they'll fly down at a very steep angle. Now, we have one other display that we can use to show how they select that footprint. In Gemini 8, you'll remember the question was asked, how do they know where they'll be coming down? As the spacecraft moves along, it has the footprint preceding it on the surface of the Earth. So if they were to fire the retros here, it would come down roughly in the southwest. And if the retros were to be fired at roughly this point, they'd be coming down in the nominal landing area. Actually, to come down here, the retros would be fired over the mid-Pacific. But we've shortened this display to show you that just as a man moving along on the surface of the Earth, walking on the street, has his shadow ahead of him, so the spacecraft has its footprint moving along, and the computers at Houston keep track of what is happening and are able to predict exactly where that footprint would be. Now, once they've selected the footprint, Walter, they can then fly and come down at a pre-selected point within the footprint. Let's show you by banking the spacecraft here. You'll see this arrow moving and see the spacecraft turning. They have now moved their position within that footprint, and we can zoom in. We'll lose the computer here, but you'll see this angle that they have moved. Now, let's bank it a little further back in the other direction. And you'll see that as this arrow moves, showing the bank, so the position is moving on the footprint. By flying the bank angles, the astronauts, using their 59-pound computer, can come in at a pre-selected point within the footprint. Now, back to you, Walter.
Now it's less than 20 minutes before Retrofire, when those four 2,500-pound thrust rockets of the retro engines fire in their ripple sequence to bring the men back into the atmosphere. Down there where that footprint is that Jack Siegel was talking about, the weather is just fair this morning. It's not as good as they'd like, but it's acceptable, they say. 2,000 feet high scattered clouds, 8-mile visibility, 12-knot winds, and 2 to 3 foot waves. There is a storm system that might be named Alma if it gets any worse, some 300 miles southwest of them, but that isn't expected to cause any difficulty for the landing this morning. Regarding that footprint and where that calculated footprint lays on the surface of the Atlantic this morning for this operation, well, perhaps Dallas Townsend here at our CBS News Space Center can explain for us.
Yes, Walter, after a million-mile space trip highlighted by Gene Cernan's 2-hour spacewalk, Gemini 9 will re-enter the atmosphere and splash down this morning inside that footprint in the West Atlantic Ocean. That footprint covers a 40 by 200-mile ellipse which lies along the spacecraft's ground track. At the center of the recovery area is the point that Gemini 9 is aiming for. Steaming near the target, about 300 miles east of Cape Kennedy, are the aircraft carrier Wasp and the destroyer Wilson. The Wasp is the prime recovery ship for this mission. To give the recovery operation mobility and flexibility, aircraft with widely varying functions also are out over the footprint this morning. In the area are Air Force JC-130s. They're equipped with radar, with telemetry and computer gear to relay information back to the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. 2 more JC-130s will link Gemini 9 directly with Houston by providing a relay of the astronauts' voice communications as they near splashdown and after they're in the water. These 2 voice relay planes can also be used for search operations. Also airborne in the recovery area are 4 SH-3A helicopters. They're twin turbine jets. 2 have the responsibility for recovering the astronauts. The 3rd one carries electronic equipment to help pinpoint the spacecraft after it lands. The final helicopter is for NASA's photographers. While Gemini 9 is expected to land somewhere within this footprint that we've been talking about, the possibility of a miss does exist. In event the spacecraft over or undershoots the recovery area, 2 planes, HC-97s, carrying pararescue teams are out there this morning. If Gemini 9 does come down long or short, those pararescue men would go into the water to help Stafford and Cernan until helicopters and then ships arrived. Completing the air and sea recovery team are 2 more planes carrying the air bosses, as they're known. These are the men who direct the recovery operation from just above the spacecraft. One air boss is to the north of the aiming point. He's the one actually in command, and he will be Commander David Barksdale. The other one will be to the south. Well, just in brief, Walter, that's what's out there now waiting, like the rest of us, for Gemini 9. And also waiting here in the studio with us this morning are 2 experts from the armed forces who will be keeping watch and monitoring those reports from downrange as the spacecraft comes back into the atmosphere. One is Captain John Wondergem of the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, and the other is Colonel Walter Thorne, who is Director of Operations of the Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Service. Well, first of all, Captain Wondergem, it's a great pleasure to see you again. The last time I saw you, you were the executive officer of the Wasp.
Yes, Dallas, it's a pleasure to be here with you, but I think I miss very much being with you out at the recovery site.
Well, I know that we'll all have a sense, I wouldn't say of homesickness, perhaps seasickness is one way of putting it. We'll be watching those television reports from the Wasp as they come in, and no doubt we'll see some very familiar faces. Colonel Thorne, you have some men who will be flying over the airspace reservation this morning, ready to jump into the water if necessary.
Yes, Dallas, we have two aircraft, one located 195 miles uprange from the carrier and another one 195 miles downrange. And as you said earlier, they have pararescue personnel on board to deploy in the event that the spacecraft undershoots or overshoots.
And those are both the C-97s, is
yes,
that right?
Yes, sir, C-97.
Well, Colonel, what is the effective range of the C-97?
The effective range is about 4,000 miles.
Mm-hmm. Where did they fly from today?
They took off from Kinley this morning, and they should be on station by now.
And they'll be flying over until the spacecraft is in the water and the men have been recovered on board the carrier.
That's right, yes, sir.
Well, Colonel Thorne and Captain Wondergem, thank you very much. We'll be talking to you again as the morning progresses.
Thank you.
Walter?
Dallas, as you know, these boys on the Gemini flights are beginning to learn how to use that lift factor of the Gemini. What they have done, of course, with this spacecraft, the McDonnell, which they did not do with Mercury, which flew simply a ballistic flight. That is, in Mercury, once they fired the retro rockets, the ship came down in a trajectory which the pilot had nothing he could do about. Under Gemini, however, they put the whole Gemini spacecraft just a little bit off center to change the center of gravity from the exact center of the spacecraft, and they've built the heat shield a little bit off of the center that it actually creates a lift to that heat shield just like the wing of an airplane. It doesn't create a lot of lift. They couldn't fly it by itself, take it off, or anything of that sort. What it gives them is about 1 foot of lift for every 5 feet of descent. But with that much lift, they can control pretty well where they're going to land the spacecraft within that footprint that Dallas Townsend was telling us about. And while the first flights had some difficulty with that lift factor in controlling the landing because other things went wrong, such as the onboard computer in the first flight, in the last 2 flights, including that landing of Gemini 8, which was an emergency landing, as you know, by Neil Armstrong and David Scott, they were able to come down out in the Pacific, even under emergency procedures, within 7 miles of their target. And that tied the record that Frank Borman and Jim Lovell set with Gemini 7 and their planned reentry into the Atlantic and recovery by the Wasp. CBS News color coverage of the recovery of Gemini 9 will continue in a moment.
Oh, I can't go out tonight with your father with this hair. And my shampoo washes the body out.
Don't wash out body, Mom. Cream in body with Luster Cream and Cream Shampoo.
Really?
Luster Cream creams in body. It has more body-building ingredients than any leading shampoo.
Creamy lather. Beautiful body.
New hairdresser, dear.
No, new Luster Cream Shampoo. And a very wise daughter.
Is there a book that tells how to get children to brush their teeth regularly? We changed to a toothpaste that's meant to reduce cavities.
I can't stand the taste of my toothpaste.
We have the same problem. You need anti-cavity Colgate. Children love its taste. And when dental scientists compared Colgate with the best-known fluoride, their report, published in the Journal of the American Society of Dentistry for Children, confirmed Colgate unsurpassed in reducing new cavities.
Get anti-cavity Colgate today.
Gemini 9, on its last revolution of the Earth, after 45 such trips around, is on its way across Australia now, just about to complete that sweep for the last time of the continent down under, out over the Pacific, and it is 11 minutes and 45 seconds from Retrofire, which will come near the Canton Island tracking station and will be relayed to the Canton Island tracking station. At that time, as you probably
Lieutenant Colonel Stafford might be thwarted in his hope to stay with the spacecraft and board the Wasp within Gemini 9. The story on the flight deck now to Don Blair.
We're standing on what is probably the busiest piece of real estate in the western Atlantic and probably the windiest right now. As Bill Ryan said, the prime recovery group is airborne. All that is except for the 3 swim helicopters which do that close-in job of picking up the astronauts with the frogmen and the photography team. They go off about 20 minutes before the expected splashdown. The primary crew is in the air. Contingency aircraft are within my vision at the aft of the Wasp flight deck and ready to take off whenever the occasion arises. This is Don Blair on the carrier deck of the aircraft carrier Wasp. All planes on the way or ready to go.
It is Tom Stafford's intention to stay aboard his spacecraft and ride it right onto the deck of the Wasp. He'll undoubtedly do that unless, as Ryan suggested from out there, the waves are so high that it's uncomfortable to stay aboard, or if they're too far away. If they're within that 4 to 7 mile range, they almost certainly will stay aboard because Stafford takes great pride in the belief that he can do that. He did with his command pilot, Wally Schirra, on Gemini 6, rode that spacecraft aboard, and if you remember, that was for the first live television pictures of recovery, also from the Wasp and relayed by satellite. And the beautiful picture that we got of Schirra and Stafford smiling and giving the thumbs up signal at the first moment that their hatch was opened aboard the carrier. We're hoping we have that kind of a successful landing this morning and those sorts of wonderful pictures. Once they're aboard the Wasp, incidentally, they are not going to stay a couple of days as they have been doing in recent flights, but they're only going to remain 4 or 5 hours and then fly on to Cape Kennedy for the rest of the medical and the flight engineering debriefing. These have been busy hours since 4:15 when these 2 astronauts awakened this morning. Stafford sounding a little sleepy, but getting right to his chores. Not only do they have to prepare for Retrofire itself, but they've got a lot of housekeeping chores up there in space. And with the Retrofire about 5 or 6 minutes away, we have time perhaps to go out to McDonnell Aircraft in St. Louis, where Dave Shoemaker and Bob Sharp are occupying our mock-up spacecraft. And perhaps Bob can tell us something about those housekeeping chores this morning. Dave, Bob?
Well, Bob, you're a fine fellow and all that, but I'm getting tired of this. Get me down.
All these storage, of course, is a real problem in a spacecraft. We work real hard to stow every item in a particular space. The chest pack, for instance, is stowed overhead in a rack there, along with all the camera and photography equipment in a special box. Each piece in there fits in a ideal location. In other words, you can't put anything in backward or it just won't fit.
You have to spend a lot of time, incidentally, rehearsing how you're going to stow things?
Yes, there's a mock-up review that on each spacecraft where the prime and the backup crews come in, look it over, arrange their own initial storage there, and then we design it to an individual mission's requirements, and of course the astronauts' preference where that's a factor.
Now, what are we doing right about now up in space?
Just prior to Retrofire here, they're within, I think, about the last 5 minutes right now. So they have gone down, activated their RCS system, or the Reentry control system, tested and checked it out. Here they're getting ready then to separate the adapter, which will occur 30 seconds prior to Retrofire. So here they've, at 30 seconds prior to it, they'll separate the ohms lines, which cuts their fuel oxygen lines. Next, they'll cut their electrical wires, and then they will physically separate the adapter and then fire the retro rockets on time.
Bob, there has been some, I suppose criticism is too strong a word, but in checking the objectives of the mission versus what was actually accomplished, do you think there's any reason that Tom Stafford should be disappointed in this flight?
No, not at all. I think this was a tremendous mission. The 3 rendezvous that were accomplished were very, very good in the fact that they depend more on pilot or crew ability than anyone's previously. And so especially the 3rd one, the one from above there where the target was below them and hard to see.
Okay, Walter.
And it's now some 4 minutes until Retrofire, and CBS News color coverage of the recovery of Gemini 9 will continue, of course, in a moment.
New from Standard Brands, soft Bluebonnet margarine, soft enough to spread on a potato chip. And Bluebonnet did it to demonstrate a great new margarine discovery. New soft Bluebonnet, so soft it spreads on anything, from thinnest crackers to softest white bread. Just taste that great Bluebonnet flavor. And it's low in saturated fat. 2 table service tubs in every pound.
Everything's better with Bluebonnet on it.
Here's a loaded question for men only.
What will it take to get your wife to use Chasen Sanborn coffee? Say it's got He-Man flavor, that it brews up a storm, it's full of beans? Ha! All she has to do is try us. Because if she hasn't tasted our coffee lately, she doesn't know about the extra flavor in Instant Chasen Sanborn. A new heftier blend. What's the heftier all about? She'll find out.
And so Stafford and Cernan, Gemini 9, are just about getting in touch with the Canton Island station. As our Colesman map shows us, that they're out beyond Australia and on the way to that area near Canton Island, at which they will fire the Retrofire rockets some 2.5 minutes from now. Let's see quickly what is going to be happening out there so you can orient yourself as you hear from the spacecraft itself. The capsule is on its way, of course, and preparing for the first stage, the Retrofire. This animation shows it to you. First of all, they have to turn the blunt end forward because that's the end the heat shield is on. They then will jettison the so-called equipment section of the spacecraft. That was that section in which the Cernan rode. Then the firing of the retro rockets, 2,500 pounds each of these thrusters. They fire 4 of them sequentially, as you see here. If they don't fire automatically when the spacecraft is in exactly the position necessary, then Stafford can fire them manually. Then they blow the Retrofire package, as you see there, and now this is the part of the spacecraft that comes back. Those are the control rockets, the reentry control system, which positions the spacecraft the way they want it. As it enters the atmosphere at some 400,000 feet high, it is still going 17,000 miles an hour at that point, and of course there is that burn-off of the ablative heat shield around the spacecraft. As they get down into the atmosphere, they send out the drogue chute first. Then it trails a smaller chute which begins to slow down the spacecraft. Then the main parachute comes out, and the spacecraft is on its way for a slow drop into the Atlantic. Retrofire now should be within about a minute, about 53 seconds. And something like this will be going on in the spacecraft. We can watch this mock-up spacecraft at McDonnell, and we're listening to Paul Haney at Mission Control.
From Gemini 9. Mark 30 seconds from Retrofire. Ten seconds away. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Retrofire. Counting up now. 14 seconds from Retrofire. We've had no report from Gemini 9. Four good retros. Gene Cernan sung it out. 4 good retros. 32, 33 seconds after Retrofire.
4 good retros. That means the spacecraft has been slowed, has begun its re-entry toward the atmosphere.
Roger, say again, you're 4 after.
Take it about 20 minutes now in a pass
across the Pacific. 296, his incremental velocity indicators show. The plan was for 298. He was within 2 feet of the planned aft reading. His down indicator showed 125. The plan there was 112. He's in excellent position.
This animation is a little bit behind the fact that Retrofire package was actually jettisoned, of course, just a moment after the firing of the retro rockets.
We still have no confirmation on retro jettison, the retro adapter itself. Now Stafford does confirm that the retro adapter has separated.
That's what you just saw. Perhaps we were closer to being on time with the animation than I thought. Although the confirmations coming relayed through the compensation seem to be coming a little slower than the actual time of events. It was almost 25 seconds after Retrofire before we got confirmation, and that was kind of a long 25 seconds. That, of course, is a critical maneuver to get these men back from space. If those retros don't fire, they're in terrible trouble. That 25 seconds was a long wait.
We're 2 minutes and 13 seconds after Retrofire. We're 31 minutes and 42 seconds from splash.
And about 17 minutes from the point at which they reached the blackout
Over
area.
Hawaii, Tom Stafford is to give the Hawaii station a detailed estimate on the retro maneuver. He will verify again his IVI readouts, and he will estimate his attitudes during retro fire. He will also advise us whether it was an auto or an automatic or a manual retro fire. We suspect it was an automatic.
The retrofire thrust was a little bit below nominal. The position spacecraft sounded like it was pitched down a little. It could mean a slight difference in the position of landing. Any abnormality like that will change the flight path in and perhaps move that footprint we've been talking
3
about a
minutes,
little bit.
26 seconds since retro fire.
Certainly
And
not
no
serious.
additional conversation.
About
Hawaii should acquire the spacecraft in approximately 20 seconds.
They're still flying through space. This is a scene from the Wasp as they warm up the helicopters to go out and stand by for the splashdown. Due some 30 minutes from now. About 15 minutes from now, the spacecraft will be at the 400,000 foot level, where it's generally considered that the atmosphere begins, where it becomes thick enough so that it is noticeable. Blackout begins 2 minutes after that, as the heat, some 5,000 to 6,000 degrees on the heat shield.
Cernan advises that the post-retro checklist has been completed. The post-retro checklist is complete. We're not certain whether that communication came via Canton or Hawaii. He should be moving out of the Canton acquisition area. And we are likely communicating with the spacecraft, or will be, via Hawaii.
Just shortly before that retrofire, they updated the retrofire sequence times out of Houston and have now made splashdown time 10:01 and 5 seconds. 1 minute later than
Now the
originally
spacecraft is
calculated.
over Hawaii. Here's how the conversation is going.
Roger, we're caught now. Do you have timer? But go ahead and give us a hack at 6 minutes away.
Roger, will do.
3, 2, 1, mark. Away.
All right, your copy.
Gemini 9 away. Hawaii United, we are cleared and we have a moon letter Roger. Roger, were you with me on the mark? We're right on. Roger. Did you have an auto retro? Sure did. And the other guys are fast on the Houston. Now 296 aft, 4 right, 125 down. Roger, your attitude's normal? Right on the money.
They did have an automatic retrofire, meaning that the equipment worked as planned. Everything had been fed into the computer, and retrofire should have come precisely on the right second, therefore. It was not required to override the automatic equipment and to fire the retro rockets manually.
Do any harm to throw it in there. It's not really mandatory, do we? Over the Hawaii station, Dr. Barry Heartscope here is showing Stafford with a heart rate of 80 beats per minute, Cernan's heart 100 beats per minute. He had estimated that the rates might get up to 130, 125 to 130 during retrofire. Of course, we have no valid vital information such as heart rate information via the Canton station. That will have to come later from onboard tapes. We'll go back and monitor now for any additional conversation via Hawaii.
Go ahead, display.
Playing it, but they said there was nothing wrong with it. All they would have to have done was maybe reselect it.
1, 2, 3, game. 79 Hawaii, we have 1 minute to LOS, standing by. Okay. Roger, Hawaii, get back to Houston.
Scheduling comm control on the
Air record.
If you listen to that voice from Hawaii, rather very faintly, we can see the scene on the Wasp, and perhaps we can pick up Don Blair there.
The swim helicopters have just taken off from the after deck of the carrier Wasp. That would be number 61, the one that will be expected to do the prime job, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Jerry Perrigan. His co-pilot is Sam Adelot. His winch operator is Seaman Pridgeon. 3 frogmen are on board that number 61. They're followed closely by helo number 53. They're no more than 500 feet off the deck right now and flying away. And they have 2 frogmen on the secondary helo. Behind the first 2 helos is helicopter number 57, which is going to photograph the entire mission, the recovery of the astronauts Stafford and Cernan. We would also point out that all these helos have 2 good cameras mounted right at the winch operation station, so that as the astronauts are pulled up out of the ocean, you'll get beautiful film of the boys coming right up when you eventually see it at home. This is Don Blair on the flight deck, watching the takeoff of the 3 primary recovery helicopters.
That's the Wasp, some 345 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean, waiting for the return of the Gemini 9, which is now slowly...
Over 10 minutes
Here's Paulini.
10 minutes since the retrofire maneuver, and Hawaii has loss of signal. The spacecraft has moved south and east of the Hawaii ring. California should acquire at 72 hours and 1 minute into the flight, about 4 minutes from now. We're 23 minutes, 30 seconds away from splash. In the recovery area, 2 weather reconnaissance aircraft have returned to the carrier Wasp. They report no significant weather disturbances in the immediate area. They report a thin overcast at about 2,000 feet and no indication of rain. This is Gemini Control, Houston.
Now, on the basis of Retrofire information fed through the computers at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, the time of splashdown has again been recalculated, and again it's about almost back to the nominal plan that was announced earlier this morning. They're now at 37 seconds after the hour for splashdown. 5 hours ago, they were saying it was going to be 39 seconds after the hour. They moved it back almost a half a minute on us, and now they've moved it back to the original, 10 o'clock and 37 seconds. 37 seconds after 10. So apparently, Retrofire was just on their original planned times, and apparently at the planned impact of those 2,500-pound Retrofire thrusters. The spacecraft now midway between Hawaii and the coast of Mexico on this pass across the North American continent is slowing down, dropping down toward the atmosphere. It will hit the atmosphere just about El Paso. It'll hit the blackout period just south of Houston. It will come out of the blackout period just about over Cape Kennedy, and then finally the plunge into the Atlantic. Gravity is now the boss. The spacecraft has been slowed down. The astronauts can control its attitude, its position in its flight down, and can, as we suggested earlier, do some guidance of it toward that footprint. But basically, gravity is the boss at the moment. 21 minutes until splashdown as we get these excellent pictures from the carrier Wasp. We saw a recovery of Gemini's 6 and 7 from the Wasp. Some beautiful pictures then, you recall. These pictures relayed to the early bird satellite hovering out there over the Atlantic, and back to relay stations here in the United States, and eventually through our CBS facilities to you at home. Occasionally, as the radar above the Wasp's mast there swings around past our own transmission radar, or transmission beam, you get that little breakup, but it doesn't last for very long like that. Cernan and Stafford have completed another great step in the American space program, despite the disappointments they have had. Some disappointments that are going to lead NASA undoubtedly to take a rather hard, long look at some of the equipment apparently being put aboard our spacecraft. As you recall, they first of all had difficulty in their original takeoff date of May 17th, when the Atlas, boosting their Agena target vehicle toward orbit, suddenly had a short circuit, a random failure, as the NASA people called it. It caused one of the engines to turn, to gimbal, a hard over condition, as they say, that plunged the Atlas and its Agena precious pay package back to the Atlantic, and the mission had to be scrubbed at that time. It was scheduled for 2 weeks later, for May 31st, using a augmented target docking adapter, which did not have the capability of movement in space. That is, did not have its own propulsion system. It could only control its attitude. No basic propulsion system, and that meant that some important parts of the experiments in space, in the docking maneuvers, and in using these unmanned target vehicles as resupply ships, in a sense, as fuelers out in space, as sources of extra thrust power in their own rockets, well, all of that had to be abandoned. The target adapter went into absolutely perfect orbit. This Atlas worked absolutely perfectly, put the ATDA in exactly the 185-mile circular orbit. And here's another announcement to Paul Haney.
Call to Gemini 9 via California.
He says they're beginning to pick up the...
time is 72 hours, 2 minutes.
So they're beginning to pick up Gemini 9 in California station. And we'll keep listening here for any communications from the spaceship. As you see by our clock, 18 minutes until splashdown. 345 miles east of Cape Kennedy.
NOAA additional communication from the spacecraft. We're presently showing an altitude of 80 nautical miles, 80 nautical miles, as it starts its final sweep across the states.
It's about 3.5 minutes away from the atmosphere now, at 400,000 foot level. It should reach just around El Paso, a little south of El Paso.
17 minutes and 37 seconds to splash.
Dallas Townsend keeping our recovery board up to date. Information reaching here on the disposition of the recovery forces. So far, this reentry seems to be nominal, as they say. Retrofire times about as planned. Attitude of the spacecraft, as far as is known, as planned. But no indication to the ground that we have heard from Paul Haney and Mission Control that it is not in the position it was supposed to be. Its exact attitude makes a great deal of difference in this trajectory to the landing spot. If it is tilted up too high, tilted down too low, when those retro rockets fire with the considerable boost that they give the spacecraft, the braking boost, it makes a difference as to what path it then follows down into the atmosphere, and it can put the landing site considerably off.
This is Gemini Control Houston. We have some minor revisions on some of our events to come here. The blackout period now is estimated to begin at 22 minutes and 1 second after retrofire. We presently show 18 minutes and 8 seconds. The next event is the end of blackout, 27 minutes and 7 seconds after retrofire. The drogue chute should deploy at 28 minutes, 43 seconds. The main chute at 30 minutes and 8 seconds, 30 minutes, 08 seconds. Splash.
400K is 19 plus 37. Get down to blackout.
Perhaps this return trajectory is not quite as nominal, that is, as planned.
Neil Armstrong, our capsule communicator on this shift, is advising Gene Cernan of the times that I just relayed to you. Present altitude 60 miles. Spacecraft coming across the White Sands area.
The change in the blackout, beginning of the blackout period, from 18 minutes after retrofire to 22 minutes after retrofire, a 4-minute change in that would indicate that they're on a much shallower trajectory than had been anticipated. And the Wasp has suddenly gone to full speed, we understand, on a heading almost due south. She was within a couple of miles of the planned landing area. She's heading due south at 22 knots, which would indicate that perhaps the reentry trajectory is somewhat off. That and this extra 4 minutes until blackout begins.
Spacecraft now is slightly below 400,000 feet.
That means it's re-entered the atmosphere.
We're 20 minutes and 15 seconds after retrofire. About one and a half minutes from now, we should begin the blackout period.
Well, now that doesn't jive with what we got a moment ago from Mr. Haney. We begin the blackout period a minute and a half from now. That's 18 minutes again. That's exactly what they said it was going to be originally before he changed it to 22.
Stafford advises he is rolling left 50 degrees. This will be followed by a roll right maneuver to 38 degrees.
These are part of the use of the lift factor of the Gemini spacecraft, these rolling maneuvers, putting that off-center heat shield in a position to gain the greatest amount of lift, either to the right or the left, as they desire to straighten it out and try to put it down that smokestack of the Wasp.
We're coming up on the begin blackout period at 22 minutes and 1 second. We presently show 21 minutes 30 seconds since retrofire.
That's back to the second figure we're given, 22-minute blackout beginning.
Present altitude shows 40 miles. Now we are into the blackout period. 22 minutes.
The blackout period, as you know, is a period when this intense heat.
Spacecraft is almost directly over Houston.
And this intense heat burning off that ablative shield, synthetic shield, causes an ionization that the radio waves will not penetrate, and therefore a communications blackout during this period of maximum stress coming into the atmosphere. In this drop from 400,000 to around 100,000 feet. The blackout period lasts
The
about 5
blackout period is predicted for 27 minutes and 7 seconds after retrofire. Would be about 4 minutes from now.
This honeycombed shield, which is our heat shield, built of a form of fiberglass, and as far as I know, is still a secret formula to the United States, brings the spacecraft back in a far more handsome condition and neater condition than does the heat shield on the Soviet spacecraft. This reporter has been privileged to see some pictures of the Soviet spacecraft as they have been recovered in the fields. They land on Earth, as you know, and
After a look at the data, Gene Kranz, the flight director's assessment of the retrofire was, it looks like we had a pretty good one. He's quite satisfied with all the data he's seen, the reports from Hawaii, additional tracking from White Sands, and we look like quite a nominal reentry at this point. We're about 10 minutes away from splash, 3 minutes away from the end of blackout period.
a nominal reentry. That's good news. Means everything looks like it's working normally. Presumably splashdown will be in the footprint. Although, as we reported to you a moment ago, shortly after they announced that the 400,000 foot level and the blackout were being reached at periods several minutes after the original flight plan, the Wasp turned and started steaming at 22 knots at 185 degrees, which is almost due south, a little bit west of south. Sounded as if their ground plot here of the radar plotting of the position of the spacecraft indicated it was not going to land exactly on target, but certainly no concern about it being very far off. So we were saying those Soviet spacecraft, which are almost round, almost like balls.
We're 2 minutes away from the end of blackout.
When they get through reentry, they've got all sorts of strings of material hanging out of them that look like long strings of burned asbestos, quite badly charred, quite tattered. Our heat shield ablates, burns off there at a very even rate.
Present altitude about 30 miles.
At a very even rate. It's a great ball of orange, red, some blue fire that the astronauts see out of the windows, the hatches of the spacecraft. Apparently it's quite a sight. John Glenn, the first American to come back from space, reported it rather graphically as he returned. He giving a test pilot's typical play-by-play report, perhaps a little more than typical. Here's the recovery plot room at the Mission Control in Houston.
One of the quietest periods during any given mission. And today's flight is certainly no exception to that precedent.
Don't know whether we can make out anything on that plot.
Flight dynamics again assures us that all the reentry tracking data looks very close to the nominal.
That's an MSK picture.
Clockboard's up if you look at the monitor.
We're advised that the Wasp now has established radar contact with the spacecraft.
The spacecraft is through the blackout period. We've got a radar contact at any rate. Should be hearing shortly from the astronauts themselves that they have survived the reentry in good shape.
27 minutes, 16 seconds into the flight. And the Cape downrange stations have acquired a signal from the spacecraft. A beacon, still no voice contact. Neil Armstrong has put in a call, and Tom Stafford is advising that everything went well throughout the blackout. He advises that he's doing another left roll. He's pulling 4 Gs. We don't notice any change in his voice level, even under that G load.
So Stafford and Cernan are through the blackout. Now the opening of the parachutes, the last critical function of this flight that began last Friday morning at
5 minutes, 35 seconds to predicted splash.
You see the simulation in St. Louis of the rapidly spinning
spacecraft is about at 50,000 feet to the point where the drogue chute should be out.
Our simulation shows the drogue chute out. We hope to have confirmation it has come out any moment.
"29 minutes, it's Retrofire.
We're still waiting to hear that drogue.
The drogue is out.
The drogue's out.
Stafford confirms that the drogue chute has deployed.
Sounds like Stafford and Cernan are, while they're very busy, are teasing us a little bit. They're taking an extra few seconds
And
to...
one of the downrange aircraft now is in communication with Gemini 9. The prediction from the spacecraft is they will be 2.5 miles long. Gene Cernan had just advised one of the downrange aircraft, 2.5 miles long.
2.5 miles long.
4 minutes and 15 seconds from splash.
That's practically down the stack. But if it's 2.5 miles long, it would account for the Wasp moving south. Actually should have been moving a little more southeast and southwest, which was the direction we were given.
30 minutes since Retrofire. We're coming up on main chute deployment.
Stafford and Cernan. Now,
Gene Cernan now revises his estimate. 3.3 miles long, he indicates.
I think you could hear that voice coming through from Houston. You could hear Cernan in the background as Paul Haney picked it up off the speakers in the master.
Meanwhile, Gene Kranz suggests here as soon as that main chute drift takes effect, it'll probably bring it'll revise Gene's estimate.
Now, our simulation shows the opening of the main chute, which should be taking place right now. We do not have confirmation yet from Houston, expecting in a moment. The Wasp, you see there by our live cameras, has a radio touch with the spacecraft.
31 minutes since Retrofire. And since the wind is from the east, the betting here is that the easterly wind will float the spacecraft right back to the aiming point. We'll see how this comes out.
They've got, what was that
We've
last
had loss of signal from the Cape stations as the spacecraft is now down very close to the water. We did not get a confirmation on main chute.
We can see it. There it is, a brilliant, bright orange
There you see it.
It is directly in front of the aircraft carrier. This must be certainly the closest any astronaut, either in the Mercury or the Gemini program, has come to a recovery ship.
The first time we've ever seen one dropping with the parachute like that.
Directly ahead of the carrier. There is some haze in the air so that the bright orange is somewhat muted, but we can see below that lovely orange semicircle a tiny dot, and as we close on it and get closer and closer, that dot will grow. For that dot is the spacecraft Gemini 9. Within it, astronauts Stafford and Cernan. Hundreds of sailors, members of the crew of the Wasp, now running forward directly to the bow of the carrier, where the big number 18 is inscribed on its flight deck. Haze now partially obscuring the sight. It's difficult to pick it up again, but it's out there and it's within sight of the carrier. And many of the members of the crew of the Wasp give thumbs up. We had word earlier today that the command pilot of Gemini 9, Lieutenant Colonel T.P. Stafford, had sent a message to Captain Gordon Hartley, the skipper of the Wasp, and the message was this: put the big ship in the landing point. I'm fixing to land. And land he is, landing exceptionally close to the Wasp, and undoubtedly he will end up closer this time than he did the previous occasion of his visit to the Wasp, when Stafford was the pilot on the flight of Gemini 6, and the command pilot was Walter Schirra. At that time, GT6 landed about 13 miles from Wasp. Closer than that was GT7. 2 days later, they came within 12 miles of Wasp. But it looks as though Lieutenant Colonel Stafford and... the big ship in the landing point. I'm fixing to land. And land he is, landing exceptionally close to the Wasp, and undoubtedly he will end up closer this time than he did the previous occasion of his visit to the Wasp, when Stafford was the pilot on the flight of Gemini 6, and the command pilot was Walter Schirra. At that time, GT6 landed about 13 miles from Wasp. Closer than that was GT7. 2 days later, they came within 12 miles of Wasp. But it looks as though Lieutenant Colonel Stafford and Eugene Cernan are going to beat that record today and come down much closer to the carrier.
Stafford has advised
and
mission control.
Word is passed on board the carrier now that the spacecraft is just a touch off the starboard side of the carrier and is just above the water.
Splashdown.
We say there is considerable haze out there. There has been all day, and the weather for a while was thought to be a problem. I'm putting binoculars on it, trying to pick out the spacecraft or that orange parachute. I cannot see the spacecraft or the parachute, but I do see the swim helicopters now deploying very, very low.
There it is on the water. The capsule is on the water.
So it may well be that Gemini 9 has now touched down.
Apparently we're seeing more than Bill Ryan is on the Wasp itself with our cameras.
Already occurred. 2 helicopters very close to the water, making...
Bill Ryan cannot see what we can see on the deck of the carrier. We can see on our television cameras, on this picture with long lens on the television cameras relayed through satellite, we saw the splashdown, the actual splashdown with the collapse of the parachute. Certainly a first.
The prime helicopter is now very,
and now you see the helicopter coming over to the spacecraft.
Whether or not the swimmers have been deployed. But the prime swim team, Lieutenant Dennis Bowman, his 2 enlisted men, Roger Bates and Dan Fraser, should be in the water right now with the flotation collar.
Stafford almost certainly will stay on the spacecraft now. He messaged from the spacecraft that he intended to do so, and he certainly, I should think, will, unless they have some trouble since splash, and there's no indication of that yet.
It's a mile and a half off the starboard bow of the Wasp.
A mile and a half from the Wasp.
So it looks as though Stafford and Cernan will come aboard. It looks as though they will be able to remain within their spacecraft.
Well, McNamara better be prepared. The Navy and NASA are going to ask for landing pads for spacecraft on these aircraft carriers.
Using binoculars now,
They're getting it right down to target.
Whether the swimmers have been deployed and whether the collar is now being affixed to the spacecraft. Still waiting word, too, that Lieutenant Bowman has used the telephone and plugged it into the side of the spacecraft and has established communication with astronauts Stafford and Cernan. Waiting now, trying to determine that. Overhead, we can see, in addition to the prime helicopters, Swim 1, Swim 2, we can see some of the planes which engaged in the search. And it wasn't much of a search in view of the remarkable flying ability demonstrated by Stafford and Cernan in bringing their spacecraft down so close to the Wasp.
We're getting varying figures, as we always do after splashdown, as to the exact distance.
Wasp is moving relatively slowly right now.
Of the spacecraft from the Wasp.
At flank speed.
It is now said to be 4.5 miles rather than 1.5. Obviously, it's very close at any rate. Either way, that's a record.
They estimate recovery in approximately 45 minutes. They will not approach the spacecraft until the collar is attached. We've just gotten word that we've gotten a thumbs up to the helo in the area from the crew. The Astros appear to be in good shape.
Astronauts in good shape. Recovery in 25 minutes.
This morning is being piloted by Lieutenant Commander J.M. Peregrine of North Kingston, Rhode Island.
I don't know about you. I'm having a little trouble hearing Paul Haney there.
The swimmers are now deployed. They are in the water and will begin the process of attaching the flotation collar, which normally takes about 30 minutes.
Well, that's the information we have at the moment. Recovery in about 25 to 30 minutes, apparently, around 4 miles from the Wasp.
With the Gemini 9 astronauts, and they've gotten a thumbs-up indication at the window. A second helicopter in the area is being piloted by Lieutenant Commander Gerald M. Weber of Jamestown, North Dakota.
Dallas, can you tell us something about this landing operation? Have you got information we don't have over there?
Well, Walter, I was going to tell you that the pilot of the prime helo is Lieutenant Commander Jerry Peregrine. Well, that's a hard G, not Peregrine, as Paul Haney said, and he does come from North Kingstown, Rhode Island.
Good, thank you. We're still trying to listen to Haney, Paul Haney from Houston, or Bill Ryan from the Wasp.
Gemini 9.
Here's Bill Ryan again.
It is on in good shape. This, of course, should provide much more comfortable flotation for the spacecraft and lessen somewhat the effect of the waves for astronauts Stafford and Cernan. So what will happen now is, and again, I would repeat that Wasp still is not making any great speed. With the estimated distance between Gemini 9 and the carrier a short while ago being 1.5 miles, and it closing now, obviously Captain Hartley is lining up the carrier to make a nice, slow, determined run at the spacecraft to allow it to come alongside the carrier on the starboard side, on the right side of the vessel. It will, in effect, drift back to the area behind the island, and there it will be recovered on hangar bay number 3, on the number 3 elevator, on this aircraft carrier. It's been drilled many times. Captain Hartley has just come out of the bridge. He's one deck below me and just gave a very, very happy thumbs up.
Well, Bill Ryan...
He has just indicated to me he is going to make a turn, so he will be going into the wind and recover the spacecraft that way. So that what he will do is he will, in effect, go out a little bit beyond it, make a 180-degree turn, and then bring it alongside and pick it up.
Well, Bill Ryan is still saying from the Wasp, as you heard there a moment ago, that the spacecraft is 1.5 miles from the Wasp. Down at Mission Control in Houston, Paul Haney is reporting it's 4.5 miles from the Wasp. It looks from our picture, which is being taken with the long lens and accounts for that bounciness you're getting in the picture, it looks like it must be certainly farther than 1.5 miles and much closer to that 4.5 miles that Haney was announcing. We had a picture of a distance of almost 7 miles with that camera at one time, you know, during the recovery of Schirra and Stafford once before. And this looks like it's almost at least half that distance anyway. The haze is preventing us from getting a very, and the motion of the ship and the motion of the camera in that 15-knot wind is causing us a little difficulty getting a steady picture. Here's Bill Ryan again.
Approach the spacecraft and recover astronauts Stafford and Cernan. Word has now passed to us that the swimmers continue to talk with the astronauts. That's done by means of a telephone. It's essentially a little plastic device. And the swim team, when it jumps, when all three members jump, two of them take telephones with them, one, of course, being a backup for the other. It is plugged into the side of the spacecraft. There's a switch on it so you can increase the volume if you need to. You push the button so that you can talk. You let go of the button so that you can hear. And what is done is that the members of the swim team who use it will talk to the astronauts and determine their condition and their wishes. There is also now word passed to us that the main chute is floating near the capsule and it should be recovered. This is an added bonus. It is something they had not aimed for on this. And the ship now continues to maneuver to come closer to Gemini 9. A big hook down on the hangar deck is ready, a crane, as is a cradle, to receive the spacecraft. In this case, with the astronauts staying in it as the spacecraft is brought up aboard the carrier, two sets of stairs, two ladders, wooden things, will be brought over to the area where the cradle sits. The spacecraft will be deposited in the cradle. The two ladders will be put in place, and the astronauts will step from their spacecraft to the deck, the hangar deck of the carrier Wasp. We're now continuing to make our turn. The spacecraft is now almost directly to starboard, a right angle from the direction in which the ship is pointing now.
We may know very shortly whether we're going to be able to see the full recovery. We're keeping our fingers crossed here in New York that when the Wasp turns to move up toward the spacecraft itself, that the big island, that control tower of the Wasp, doesn't come between our camera and the spacecraft. But we'll all keep our fingers crossed for that. We still believe that the spacecraft is some 4 miles from the aircraft carrier. With a videotape replay, we can take a look at the final moments of that spacecraft again before splash. It was a remarkable picture we got, a very quick one. There it is, right there, you see, just as it splashed and the canopy of the parachute collapsed. Really quite a remarkable picture. We haven't seen that. Only a few people have seen that before. The few who have been in recovery aircraft circling the area of landings. There is the spacecraft bobbing in the water. It looks as if the collar has been attached around it, although we can't be sure in that picture. There are the frogmen working with the spacecraft. They're the men who attach that flotation collar.
Also is standing up in the spacecraft.
We have word to Tom Stafford and
The
Eugene
three swimmers working busily around it are Lieutenant Junior Grade Ben Bowman,
Stafford and
third
Cernan are
class
standing in the
Daniel
spacecraft, we're told.
Frazier, and Seaman Roger Bates. Tom Stafford is shaking hands with one of the swimmers now, congratulating them on the good job.
None of these astronauts can forget the experience of Gus Grissom in their second suborbital flight into space, and his spacecraft was lost in one of the deepest points of the Atlantic because the hatch blew prematurely and it filled with water. But now the flotation collars around this spacecraft, Gemini 9, is safe, and very soon will be lifted aboard the Wasp. While we're watching these scenes and awaiting the recovery of the spacecraft, Dallas Townsend here in our CBS News Space Center in New York has a distinguished guest, Navy Captain John Wundegren, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations in Washington. He's a former executive officer of the Wasp. Dallas?
Yes, indeed, Walter, and Captain Wundegem, I keep calling him Commander because that's the way I remember him, but Captain Wundegem had a distinction of recovering. He was the pilot of the prime recovery helicopter when Scott Carpenter returned from orbit. John, that was 3 years ago now, I guess.
That was in 24th of May in '62.
62, that's right. That's right, 4 years ago. Well, the space program has advanced with leaps and bounds since then, hasn't it?
My golly, if they get any closer, there's no question it's going to be down the stack, because there was a little overshoot on that one.
Well, John, you've seen a lot of these recoveries, probably more than most, but I suppose you've never before, until just now, watching our monitors here in our CBS News Space Center, actually seeing the spacecraft come down on the surface of the Atlantic.
This is the first time. The chute was almost invisibility last time, but this is the closest it's been.
And we can see it right now, I believe. We're getting a very good shot of it now from the deck of the Wasp. I would say probably it's no more than 1.5 miles off the bow right now, if you can see there.
Well, they've got the problem, of course. He's got to get the spacecraft a little bit on the port quarter, and so it has to maneuver a little bit for the position. And then also Captain Hartley is keeping in mind the problem of trying to keep the radar on the satellite. So there's a twofold problem that he has to take into consideration.
And also, John, he has to provide a sort of a windbreak for the spacecraft in those final moments, doesn't he?
That's correct. Of course, they don't want to have the ship drift down on the spacecraft, and also doesn't want to have the problem of the wind turning the ship just as he comes to a halt. So the problem of bringing it in on the port quarter just a little bit, just to break the wind, and then that'll bring it right under the number 3 elevator for a pickup.
John, for the benefit of the landlubbers in the audience, if there are any, perhaps you could explain in some detail what port quarter actually means.
Well, if off the left forward quarter of the ship then, and as he makes an approach, instead of making it right into the wind or having the wind over on the right-hand side where it would carry the capsule on into the ship, a little bit off to the left, and this gives the ideal condition for drift, sea conditions, and also allows him to keep the ship pretty well stationary as he comes to a stop, because of course the ship wants to weather vane as it slows down to a stop.
Yes, indeed. It's a very delicate operation, of course.
Well, he has to commence his approach about 1,600 yards to a mile ahead of time. He's proceeding at about 30 knots, and it takes this distance to slow that 42 tons, 1,000 tons down to stop.
And we'll be watching as it actually takes place. Well, thank you very much, John, and now back to Walter.
Thank you. Back here down at the carrier Wasp, rather, not back here at my desk, but down on the carrier Wasp. We've been watching these pictures coming in, and excitement is mounting. The Marines have got a red carpet out for the spacemen. The collar has been affixed. Stafford and Cernan have been standing in the hatches, and let's go down and listen to the excitement on the Wasp.
61. They're the ones that are just about 20, 25 feet off the water now. The frogmen are there. The flotation collar is on. The Wasp band, I should say, has just struck up. They are right back toward the entrance to sick bay. As far as Stafford and Cernan are concerned, this coming on board in the Gemini 9 spacecraft, as they will most certainly do, means they've got a few steps less to take in getting down to their first initial destination here on the Wasp than they would have had they come aboard in a helicopter on the flight deck, as we were all set to prepare for. Well, in that fabulous, unforgettable sight, which had most of the sailors on the deck here jumping a foot off the flight deck, an unforgettable sight of a parachute opening as though a civilian, maybe a skydiver, just on a lark on a Monday morning. It seemed unbelievable. I have been kidding all during this trip with the skipper of the Wasp, Captain Gordon Hartley, in words to say, I hope, sir, that the Gemini 9 comes down so close to the Wasp that you're hard put to maneuver her out of the way to avoid being hit by a descending spacecraft. And it just kind of caught the words in my throat when Bill Ryan and I and 2,500 Navy personnel, NASA people, the medical teams, and the Marines saw that chute pop out right smack in front of us. You'd have to be here to believe it, and in time, I'm sure, through film, news, television, and the like, movies, movie tone reels, and the like, you'll see it, and I hope you'll see the exact same view that we got, and that thrilling moment when Gemini 9 splashed down into the water. We've had, of course, time to do a little calculation. We're about, if I may check in again, we're still about that mile, and the Wasp is turning circular now, and we'll be moving over very, very shortly. I'd say perhaps about 10 minutes, and we'll be almost within reaching out to touch distance of the Gemini 9. But as I started to say, we've had chances to do calculation, and by just a mode of comparison, the average parachute jumper that goes out of a plane just by himself and his parachute and his spare would hit the ground, descend to the ground at about 11 miles an hour. And it's not bad considering that the Gemini 9 comes down at only 20 miles an hour. And when you figure that this is a 4,400-pound spacecraft on a parachute which is 84 feet across, becomes quite a fantastic operation. Well, the whole thing is just rather inconceivable unless you're here to watch it, see it, and see the whole project grow. There's 72 suspension lines on that canopy, which, by the way, I think Bill Ryan said before, has been retrieved. They don't always make the effort because it just isn't that vital a piece of material. There are no tests or anything that have to be read. In the past, they have recovered the canopy on a couple of occasions, merely...
Mission Control just a few moments ago as Gene Krantz, flight director for this team at Mission Control, took a bow for that landing, for the computations which put the spacecraft so close to the aircraft carrier Wasp, which you see there. You were listening to Don Blair aboard the spacecraft. He and Bill Ryan doing their usual excellent job reporting the return of the Gemini 9, but because they do not have monitors there, return monitors, they could not tell that we saw the canopy open also and saw that landing on the water. They thought they eyeballed it and that they had an exclusive view of it. They're wrong. We had as good a view as they did, and all of the American people had a chance to see it, and those who will see it overseas by relay. It certainly was, as Don Blair said, a great sight. Now the aircraft carrier Wasp maneuvering about a mile from the spacecraft Gemini 9 floating in the Atlantic. Its three-day mission in space successfully concluded on this, the fourth morning since it launched from Cape Kennedy last Friday. And the lifting back onto the aircraft carrier probably will come in the next 10 or 15 minutes, according to the original schedule that was announced to us after they knew that the landing of Gemini 9 was so close to target, closer than any spacecraft before, with the possible exception of Gordon Cooper and Faith 7, the Mercury 9 flight, the last of the Mercury flights. CBS News color coverage of the recovery of Gemini 9 will continue in a moment after a pause for station identification.
This is CBS. The Week in Space, CBS News continuing coverage of the reentry and recovery of the mission of Gemini 9. Now again from CBS News Space Center in New York, Walter Cronkite.
Lieutenant Colonel Tom Stafford, who shortly will be a colonel, getting that automatic upgrading thanks to another successful space flight. At 35 years old, native of Weatherford, Oklahoma, and his co-pilot, Eugene Cernan, 32-year-old Navy Lieutenant Commander, who will shortly be a commander, the youngest man yet to go into space, have successfully completed the flight of Gemini 9. They're on the water some 345 miles east of Cape Kennedy from where they started on Friday morning. The aircraft carrier Wasp is about a mile away. It was approximately 4 miles away at the time of the landing, the closest on-target landing of a spacecraft yet, and it is now about to recover the spacecraft. The flotation collar was attached within minutes after the landing, which we saw in a television first. We saw the canopy open and the parachute to let the spacecraft into the water. The astronauts, Stafford and Cernan, emerged shortly after the flotation collar was attached. That is, they stood up in the seat of the spacecraft. There's remaining aboard, however, to be lifted in the spacecraft onto the flight deck of the carrier Wasp. We see the large radar antenna of the Wasp there in our live television pictures relayed by satellite from the carrier. This carrier, which also has picked up 3 other sets of Gemini astronauts, is now about to add a 4th to their record. And the Chief Petty Officer's mess aboard the Wasp is cleaning a place on the bulkhead there to hang a couple of more astronauts' pictures. They've got a autographed heroes gallery in that CPO mess. We have one interesting fact out of Houston this morning. Paul Haney reported a little while ago, quite exultantly, that communications were never so good between a spacecraft re-entering and the recovery forces and mission control in Houston. He said that there were constant communications with Stafford as he came over the coast of the United States and dropped toward their landing spot, which raises the question among any of us newsmen who we think represent the American public as to why we weren't let in on it. There were none of those transmissions which were relayed to us, and as a matter of fact, they were very slow in Houston, letting us know that the parachutes had opened and gave us a few seconds at any rate, of a very bad time. Don Blair is aboard the USS Wasp and doing an excellent job of describing this recovery operation. Let's listen in for a moment.
Space agency justice in the world that Gemini 9 should come down in full view of so many happy witnesses. And I'm sure this has got to go into the book. No doubt about it. This has got to go into the book as the most stirring sight, recovery-wise, and closest to ship descent in the Gemini logs and even in the Mercury logs. I can go back here and give you an idea. There were 2 shots in the Mercury program. One was Wally Schirra's 6 revolution flight in October of 1962. And after that, the Faith 7 with Gordo Cooper, L. Gordon Cooper, If you'll recall, Gordo had a little malfunction with his re-entry attitude control system and made an historic manual.
Seemed to have lost Don Blair there for a moment in the aircraft carrier Wasp. What he was telling us was about the landing, some of the previous landings. Cooper's landing particularly, which he was just reciting to us, was a remarkable one. That's the closest yet, and Cooper did it by himself, manually controlled that reentry. That is, he put his spacecraft in precisely the right attitude and position, and then fired his retro rockets manually precisely at the right moment, because he lost the automatic function to do that, and he came down within 4 miles of the destroyer Kearsarge, his target out in the Pacific. 7,000 yards was his range. That's the closest yet. Even with these controlled re-entries of the Gemini, nobody has quite done that yet. However, this may have set the new record today. We're still a little confused. The boys on the aircraft carrier were reporting to us 1.5 miles. Houston was saying 4.5 miles. It'll depend on which one of those figures is right as to whether Gemini 9 beat the record of MA9. CBS News color coverage of the recovery of Gemini 9 will continue in a moment.
Neat and quick, the freshest stick is deodorant stick by Old Spice. You're fresh each hour from shower to shower with deodorant stick by Old Spice.
Yes, here's deodorant protection you can trust. Old Spice Stick. Goes on faster, never sticky. Feels better. Gives you a man's kind of freshness. Try it.
You're fresh each hour from shower to shower with deodorant stick by Old Spice.
This is corn silk, a unique face powder made from corn. Yes, corn. Watch. It absorbs excess oils, keeps shine off your nose hour after hour, holds delicate moisture, no powdery look. Corn silk adds no color to your face, won't streak or change color. You feel as innocent of makeup as you look. New corn silk from Schulten.
We're waiting for more pictures from the aircraft carrier Wasp and for word that they are moving alongside to pick up Gemini 9. This spacecraft piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Tom Stafford and Lieutenant Commander Eugene Cernan, which set a new record for spacewalks when Cernan stepped from it yesterday morning in the void of space 185 miles above the Pacific, and for 2 hours floated free of the spacecraft. Well, that's not quite true. Part of that time he was back there in the adapter, not really free of the spacecraft, not inside it, outside, standing in the back of the spacecraft, trying through that fogged shield, that face shield of his, to don his astronaut maneuvering unit, the big backpack with which he had hoped to really, in a sense, become a one-man spaceship, truly independent of the spacecraft he had left that had boosted him into space. Now that, as you know, turned out to be impossible, partly because of the fogged head, the visor, the fog visor, and they still don't know why it fogged. But for him, it was like riding in an automobile that the windshields are fogged over on. He couldn't see out at all. He tried to feel his way into the AMU, the maneuvering unit. He had difficulty getting all of the dials and gauges set and the arms down, partly because it is believed of that fogging. At any rate, when he did get communications plugged in, the communications were bad between the AMU and Tom Stafford back in the spacecraft, and that part of the walk was dropped. He walked 2 hours and 5 minutes instead of 2 hours and 35 minutes, but that did set a record in space, almost 4 times as long as Leonov and Ed White walked in the combination of their times. Down there in the Atlantic, 345 miles east of the point from which they started, some 4 days, 45 revolutions, 1.25 million miles ago, by himself, manually controlled that reentry. That is, he put his spacecraft in precisely the right attitude and position, and then fired his retro rockets manually precisely at the right moment, because he lost the automatic function to do that. and he came down within 4 miles of the destroyer Kearsarge, his target out in the Pacific. 7,000 yards was his range. That's the closest yet. Even with these controlled reentries of the Gemini, nobody has quite done that yet. However, this may have set the new record today. We're still a little confused. The boys on the aircraft carrier were reporting to us 1.5 miles. Houston was saying 4.5 miles. It'll depend on which one of those figures is right as to whether Gemini 9 beat the record of MA9. CBS News color coverage of the recovery of Gemini 9 will continue in a moment.
Neat and quick, the freshest stick is deodorant stick by Old Spice. You're fresh each hour from shower to shower with deodorant stick by Old Spice.
Yes, here's deodorant protection you can trust. Old Spice Stick. Goes on faster, never sticky. Feels better. Gives you a man's kind of freshness. Try it.
You're fresh each hour from shower to shower with deodorant stick by Old Spice.
This is corn silk, a unique face powder made from corn. Yes, corn. Watch. It absorbs excess oils, keeps shine off your nose hour after hour, holds delicate moisture, no powdery look. Corn silk adds no color to your face, won't streak or change color. You feel as innocent of makeup as you look. New corn silk from Schulten.
We're waiting for more pictures from the aircraft carrier Wasp and for word that they are moving alongside to pick up Gemini 9. This spacecraft piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Tom Stafford and Lieutenant Commander Eugene Cernan, which set a new record for spacewalks when Cernan stepped from it yesterday morning in the void of space 185 miles above the Pacific, and for 2 hours floated free of the spacecraft. Well, that's not quite true. Part of that time he was back there in the adapter, not really free of the spacecraft, not inside it, outside, standing in the back of the spacecraft, trying through that fogged shield, that face shield of his, to don his astronaut maneuvering unit, the big backpack with which he had hoped to really, in a sense, become a one-man spaceship, truly independent of the spacecraft he had left that had boosted him into space. Now that, as you know, turned out to be impossible, partly because of the fogged head, the visor, the fog visor, and they still don't know why it fogged. But for him, it was like riding in an automobile that the windshields are fogged over on. He couldn't see out at all. He tried to feel his way into the AMU, the maneuvering unit. He had difficulty getting all of the dials and gauges set and the arms down, partly because it is believed of that fogging. At any rate, when he did get communications plugged in, the communications were bad between the AMU and Tom Stafford back in the spacecraft, and that part of the walk was dropped. He walked 2 hours and 5 minutes instead of 2 hours and 35 minutes, but that did set a record in space, almost 4 times as long as Leonov and Ed White walked in the combination of their times. Down there in the Atlantic, 345 miles east of the point from which they started, some 4 days, 45 revolutions, 1.25 million miles ago, astronauts Stafford and Cernan await pickup from the aircraft carrier Wasp. They have been standing in the seats of their spacecraft. The flotation collar has been attached by the scuba divers from the aircraft carrier. The Marines aboard have laid out a red carpet. The band of the Wasp has struck up a welcoming song. Signs have been placed along the island made by the sailors themselves, welcoming Cernan and Stafford home, welcoming another spacecraft to the Wasp, the 4th to be picked up by that aircraft carrier, and possibly the last. There is some talk that it is to be relieved of that duty, and other ships will take the place of the Wasp. While, on the other hand, NASA begins to study further the possibility of land landings for our spacecraft. The Russians, as you know, come down on land, and they're studying the possibility of coming down in the ocean. So both of us apparently would like to improve whatever technique we've got. It seems doubtful that much improvement could come after a flight like this, however. The next big improvement will be to improve the lifting factor of the spacecraft. And lifting bodies are being worked on to bring our men back from manned space stations and from interplanetary travel. Lifting bodies, no wings, but the bodies themselves of the spacecraft so formed that they'll have more of a lift even than do these Geminis, which isn't very much. Enough lift, as a matter of fact, is being talked about to make one full revolution of the Earth after they're back in the atmosphere. We have lost the downrange picture for a moment from the aircraft carrier Wasp. We're hoping to get it back at any moment, and as soon as we do, of course, we will be showing it to you. We got remarkable pictures from our cameras on the Wasp with the signal being relayed to the early bird satellite and back to us here. Remarkable pictures for the first time of the chute opening and then of the spacecraft dropping into the ocean just a couple of miles from the Wasp. Exact distance still to be determined. Ah, there's the picture back, and you see the Wasp has closed somewhat with the spacecraft.
Moving over.
There we can pick up the voice of Don Blair reporting from the Wasp.
Affixed to the spacecraft and permitting it to ride very well, very comfortably, and somewhat high in the water. Of course, the hatches are open, and it is quite desirable, to say the least, to keep the spacecraft reasonably high in the water so that water won't get inside. Not merely for the sake of keeping it clean and neat and keeping water out so that it won't be lost now, but also for the great amount of research that the spacecraft itself will be subject to, as will many of the items which are still inside it. From the position you and I have now done on the hangar deck, even if we could get past the security people out to the far edge of the elevator, I sincerely wonder whether or not we'd be able to see the spacecraft. It apparently is in close to the bow now and would be blocked from our vision, but very, very shortly it should be quite close to this elevator, and the maneuver will begin. Line drop down, affixed to the spacecraft, and heavier lines passed until finally the good strong one, which will be on the big boom, and the spacecraft will be lifted aboard.
I might mention, Bill, that we're only a few yards now as far as the spacecraft is concerned away from the point where a line will be fired to the Frogmen. And in it's much the same manner that the Navy deploys lines and then continuing heavier lines to
for high lines
from ship to ship or for refueling. They start with a very, very light line. It will look like the kind of twine you might keep around the house. It'll be a red string, which will be fired out, and Denny Bowman or one of his comrades will grab it. From there, he'll be pulling it down, and he'll find himself with a larger piece of rope. And from there, that larger piece of rope will be the one which will pull them right under the hook of the crane. And of course, this crane is capable of lifting aircraft out of the water, so a 4,400-pound spacecraft will present no great problem. By the way, one of the reasons why Gemini 9 and other similar spacecraft float in the manner they do, they take on water, and about 2,000 pounds of water, well, let's face it, about a ton of water added to that 4,400-pound spacecraft is hauled under the waterline, and it gives it a stability and an ability to at least stay topside as far as those two hatches are concerned. Although it has been said, and rightly so, that for all its ability to maneuver in outer space and its configuration, which can resist the tremendous heat of reentry, no one could have built a better craft for possibly bobbing around and getting seasick than that spacecraft, Gemini 9. Bill?
John, I'm going to take off these headphones and use this cupcake-like microphone we have to talk to Dr. Carpentier. Doctor, can you give us any word from the spacecraft, from the astronauts?
Yes, as well, we saw them land. We were just a few hundred yards away. The swimmers were in the water almost immediately. And just seemed like no time at all. The hatches were open. We got a thumbs up from both astronauts. They both looked great.
Did you have any conversation with them? Were you able to talk to them or relay it through Bowman?
No, just through hand signals.
And did you have any talk with Bowman at all, or was it all through hand signals?
All hand signals.
Could you tell us again about watching that spacecraft come down, Doctor?
Well, it was a pretty magnificent sight. We were just...
Roughly?
No idea.
Not much, huh?
No.
But you were able to watch it all the way down?
Yeah, as soon as it came out of the clouds.
How much of a splash?
Not much. Surprisingly little.
Good. Thank you very much, Doctor. Dr. William Carpentier, he is the surgeon who's in charge of the medical facilities with the NASA recovery team. And as I mentioned earlier, he flies in Swim 1. He goes out with that first helicopter, and if needed or desired, he will make the move from the helicopter. He wears a wetsuit, and he will make the move, go into the water, and render whatever medical assistance might be needed or desired. However, in this case, he needed none. That is, neither Stafford nor Cernan needed any medical attention, so Dr. Carpentier did not jump.
Two representatives from NASA that we've come to know very, very well through our twice-a-day news briefings here, Don Green and John Stonecipher. Just, well, it's the first time we've seen them suited up, shirt, tie, and suit. But, of course, this is the kind of a day that these people work for. This is their whole livelihood and their whole concern and interest. So they are really decked out right now, kind of in keeping with the dress whites, which are worn here today by as many Navy personnel as is practical. Of course, anybody that's on regular shipboard duty and has got details to take care of is in their usual work uniform. But the overall population of the carrier Wasp today is in a nice, snappy white outfit, be they officer or crew members.
On the hangar deck now and out on the number 3 elevator are the people who will be most directly concerned with this direct and physical recovery of Gemini 9. The people who will supervise and take part in the affixing of the lines, the working of the boom. Also out there is Mr. C.J. Stuka. He's from the McDonnell Corporation. The people who make the spacecraft, and he will have to make a number of inspections, making sure that D-rings and other pieces of equipment within the spacecraft which conceivably could trigger explosives which are in there have been put in safety positions, and also check on some of the fuels which still might be present and present in any sufficient quantity to cause physical harm to people should they escape.
Bill? We're at about the point now where Captain Hartley, who was on the bridge directly looking over the spacecraft now, should be dropping his now popular chips of wood out the window. And the purpose of that, and believe me, it is a difficult task at best to determine exactly when a carrier or any large naval ship is dead in the water, becalmed, so to say, and no more forward speed, so that all necessary operations for spacecraft recovery can then safely be taken. The crane can be lowered, and they're not going to have a spacecraft go drifting a few fast feet away and, you know, just have to play small games there to get that ship up, that Gemini 9 up here. So what? So the commanding officer of this carrier USS Wasp throws out wood chips from his high perch overlooking Gemini 9 and the recovery mission in the area that we're in right now. And when those chips hit the water, he can tell their relation to the ship as to whether we are actually moving. If that wood chip stays right in his line of vision, directly below where it hits, the job is done. The frogmen are waving at us now. They're that close.
So the astronauts, you can see, Don, the hatch is open. The astronauts waving. One frogman has just jumped off the collar of the spacecraft. There now, we can see the head of Stafford, who waves one hand, then clenches both hands and waves them. Cernan, too. As we look at it from here, Stafford, the command pilot, is on the right. Cernan on the left. Behind him, standing on the collar, one of the swimmers. Now they both wave. Stafford gives a thumbs up. Big smile.
That is a most welcome sight, and a couple of happy fellas right now.
Looks very relaxed. Both look very relaxed.
You get a good view there now, too, Bill, of the reentry attitude control section, the small open end of the spacecraft. And the moment that Gemini 9 hits the water, or any spacecraft, there is a can in there of dye, which has like a vegetable material top, which dissolves instantly. The instant that craft hit the water in that position.
You know, Don, it's remarkable now, looking at Cernan, the pilot of Gemini 9, sitting there, leaning back a bit on the open hatch on his side. It almost looks like a man sitting in the back seat of a convertible on a Saturday afternoon somewhere.
I have long since given up trying to really realize what a fantastic thing we are eyewitness to. The whole thing is practically beyond comprehension. Where they have been, what they have done, and the almost tame manner in which we see them now.
And now, Don, the hatches have been closed.
I see that.
All three swimmers are getting back in the water, I think, or at least on the collar. This is now as we prepare to affix the lines to Gemini 9 and lift her out of the water, bring her up to this number 3 elevator of the Wasp, and bring her on board. And it'll be right here a few feet from where we're standing that Stafford and Cernan will set foot on United States soil. If you are willing to accept the premise that they do not take United States soil with them when they go aloft in Gemini 9. But the line is about to be fired.
That is the business end of the elevator we've been describing to you. And all these officials with the gun and the line which will go out are standing right on the edge where they have been probably for 20 minutes now. There'll be an official greeting by the ship's executive officer, and your NASA officials will probably be the first ones to say any words at all. The astronauts, I understand, will have a short, brief comment, as astronauts historically do. They speak briefly, tersely, and they are not known to be more than men of few words. What they do say, they usually make count.
The spacecraft, Don, now, it might be 100 yards from the number 3 elevator, riding the waves very, very well. A yellow collar affixed around the spacecraft, a yellow raft floating next to it, and another orange raft out there. 2 of the swim team are on the collar at the blunt end of the spacecraft. The other one appears to be up at the narrow end, and that green dye you mentioned trails out, portions of it 20, 25, 40 yards long from the back.
And it is a brilliant green, too, Bill. I imagine that 10,000 feet up, that stands out just like a line pointing right to Gemini 9.
Also still in the area of the spacecraft and still working, those smoke bombs which were dropped from the helicopters to mark their site. They're out a bit from the carrier now, but still out there, still providing smoke. Smoke which happily hasn't been needed for quite a while, because this was one which they took down with the eyes. They followed it all the way down.
5 frogmen in the water, Bill.
As Dr. Carpentier mentioned a moment ago, they were able to watch it on the main chute all the way down till it hit the water. And it didn't make a very big splash, he said. Now, as you've mentioned, Don, it's a delicate maneuver to get a ship of this size alongside an item without that much size and get the two so positioned that one can recover the other.
There goes the line. The line has just been fired over. I would hope, optimistically, that you heard it over my own microphone here. The line is in the water, and a frogman is swimming out to it. I'll find out just as soon as I can. He's got the line. He's got it in tow. He's got it in his left hand, and he's side-stroking back. And I believe it's Denny Bowman, the chief of this frogman team, standing up and giving an affirmative wave of the arms at the bell end, the large end of the spacecraft. He's right on the edge of the color, that brilliant yellow color. This is quite a play of colors. There are 2 bright yellow life rafts in the water. There is 1 orange life raft in the water, the yellow flotation color, the brilliant green of the dye going for many, many yards out into the ocean now. And it almost looks brown rather than black, the spacecraft, from our vantage point, just inside the hangar deck off elevator number 3. You've got touches of white, you've got red, you've got the black suits of the frogmen, and it shouldn't be any mystery then, telling you what kind of colors you've got to work with, why the camera fans go absolutely nuts over a situation like this. I don't know, but what 90% of the sailors on deck, in any position at all, to get near this scene, haven't been taking pictures at a pace like they have never done before. Unless, of course, they've been in a position to see a Gemini recovery or a Mercury spacecraft recovery before.
It's surprising, Don, that with the duration of Gemini flights we've had, with the fact that these two men have spent some 72 hours in flight, in space. And we have learned to live with that. We have learned to live with men in space for 2 weeks. And yet, when we get a recovery, a re-entry, and a spacecraft coming down quite close to the carrier, and we are perhaps 5 or 6 or 7 minutes away from complete recovery and the time when they will be on the deck, we begin to get a little impatient. Time, I think, moves much more slowly with each foot that the spacecraft approaches the carrier.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that, Bill, because I thought maybe it was me. And I know that if you're sitting at home, listening and or watching, or both, that there must be a tendency to feel the same way. While they said it came down within 1.5 miles of the carrier, how come they're not there yet?
Now a crew of sailors is working, hauling on a line. The heat shield is now facing the elevator, the big blunt end of the spacecraft directly facing the elevator, as a crew of sailors hauls on a line which is connected through a pair of pulleys to that heat shield area of the spacecraft. Pulling it now with brute manpower, and that's still needed. That's still needed even in this space age.
A fine look we're getting now at that much talked about heat shield. And let's face it, if they didn't have that heat shield to come in with, well, we would never have an end of a mission such as we have right now. But you can very visibly and demonstrably see just what a fantastic beating that shield has to take coming back into the Earth's atmosphere.
And now as we stand on the hangar level between the sea state which prevails and the wave motion caused by the presence of the carrier itself, the waves are probably moving 6 to 8, possibly even more than that, feet out there. So that from time to time, even though we stand in elevated positions, the spacecraft bobs out of our sight, then comes back up again, and then back into view one more time. The rafts now, the two rafts seem to be separated from the spacecraft. Of course, the collar is still there. The crew continues to haul on the line.
You've got three frogmen, still with one of those life rafts, which is now just forward of elevator number 3. And you can see we can see the line straightening out. The sure indication that directly below, we're going to hook onto a Gemini 9 spacecraft very shortly. Again, right in the middle of the elevator is situated a very heavily constructed steel dolly, which has 2 huge half-moon rings on it, which perfectly fit the configuration of Gemini 9 and will allow it to be set down in the manner you're used to seeing it when you see pictures of spacecraft moving through space with the small end forward as the nose of the spacecraft. In that manner, it will set down so that when the hatch doors are opened, both men can stand straight up. And of course, the hatch doors are just slightly over to the side.
Here now on the hangar deck, Captain Gordon Hartley, commanding officer of the Wasp. He's, maybe 2 feet away from the red carpet, just back from the elevator. Just came down. His executive officer, Captain J.B. Schaefer, is already here. Captain Hartley now talking to some of the civilians on board.
Most of all,
he steps out on the elevator, is talking to some of the Marine Guards, some of his own sailors. He steps back now off the elevator, moves within the confines of the hangar deck once more, and stands here quite pleased, quite happy, ready to welcome astronauts Stafford and Cernan aboard his ship,
Bill
USS Wasp.
Bill, a question for you, sir. The dates of Gemini 10, I was just wondering in connection with Captain Hartley being relieved of command of the Wasp.
There goes the Gemini 9 out of the Atlantic up to the deck of the aircraft carrier. Let's rejoin Don O'Neill and Bill Ryan.
Just above the level of the elevator.
And it is a rather, well, shall we say, weather-beaten looking, Bill? How's it look to you?
Well, it would be with all the heat it has been subject to. It's understandable it would have that mottled look. The water continues to pour from it. Approximately a ton of water is around and within that spacecraft when it's first lifted from the surface, but that pours off and we're left with, around 4,000, 4,500 pounds.
Bill, it remains to be seen in just a moment who just gave the signal, but to Chick Stucca of McDonnell Aircraft. I just saw a thumbs up from inside the spacecraft.
Now they're moving to break the collar loose. They're breaking straps, and the collar is coming loose.
The elevator of the Wasp right now, elevator 3, is becoming covered with green dye. Actually seawater, which is still pouring out. And because of the fact that Gemini 9 is slightly tilted forward, not much, but slightly tilted forward, you've got this pouring out, and it's still coming out at this moment. Now it is facing the small end in toward the hangar deck of the carrier Wasp. Sailors are quickly pulling the flotation collar into the ship, inboard, off of the elevator, and Gemini 9 will be settled down into its carriage, the dolly as we have called it, with the business end, the reentry control section end, facing us, and almost directly pointing at the red carpet upon which Stafford and Cernan will be walking in just a few minutes from now.
That loud report you just heard, Don, incidentally, was the flotation collar. As it was pulled away from the area where the spacecraft is being put down, it hit something, and it now is leaking its air.
Oh, boy. Thank you. Thank you for the report. And also, I might add that steps, small stairways in brilliant yellow and white with the Wasp emblem emblazoned on the sides, have just been hurriedly pulled out, so that when these hatch doors open, as they will momentarily, the McDonnell and NASA people will be at the top of the steps. Chick Stucca is going up there with...
The wrenches are going in place now. Here come the hatches open. Put down, it hit something, and it now is leaking its air.
Oh, boy. Thank you. Thank you for the report. And also, I might add that steps, small stairways in brilliant yellow and white with the Wasp emblem emblazoned on the sides, have just been hurriedly pulled out, so that when these hatch doors open, as they will momentarily, the McDonnell and NASA people will be at the top of the steps. Chick Stucca is going up there with...
The wrenches are going in place now. Here come the hatches open.
There's Tom Stafford.
And here they come. Tom Stafford
and Eugene Cernan
to pop his head out, recognizable by a noticeable lack of hair on the top. Slightly balding Tom Stafford, and a very, very happy Eugene Cernan.
They're speaking, Don, with John Stonecipher, who is the team leader here, the NASA recovery team leader. Again, Stafford clasps both hands, gives a thumbs up. He and Cernan shake hands. Now Stafford walks down one set of stairs.
This is the farthest these men have been away and from each other in 4 days.
Without anyone at the moment.
Now they'll be walking past us in just a moment, being greeted by the skipper.
Well, they said you were going to be over, and I had you on the radar table. You're going to have to be careful.
Tom Stafford waving up to the bridge. Tom Stafford there on the left. Eugene Cernan, who made that 2-hour spacewalk yesterday, on the right.
We'll talk to you all about it.
Tom Stafford, the first man to do 2 flights in the Gemini.
Here they come, shaking hands, saying hello, and there's a slight beard growth on Tom Stafford, but Gene Cernan doesn't look like someone who's been away from his razor for 3 days.
You can see Cernan's special astronaut pants there, made of metal. Iron pants, they're called. Special metal to protect him against the blast of the rockets he never got a chance to use that would have maneuvered him in space. Go down into the island of the Wasp. They're going below to sick bay for immediate medical debriefing, medical tests. Because we could quite clearly see there didn't seem to be anything wrong with Tom Stafford and Eugene Cernan.
Stafford and Cernan have cleared the red carpet past the Marine color guard with the flags of the United States Marines. Now taking a look in the Gemini 9 capsule, we can see doors wide open, and all equipment being checked out at this moment by McDonnell people. We're looking around the forward and bell end of Gemini 9, and there is something which has to be done here which is vitally important, and that is to make sure that the rocket ejection seats, which have the capability of ejecting these astronauts at a very, very high altitude during re-entry, about 40,000 feet, these seats have to be checked to make sure they are not in any condition where they could possibly be triggered off.
Hello, truck.
They would send quite a rocket blast out. And
The
also
last thing-
the very, very forward end.
The last thing that those astronauts do before leaving the spacecraft is to disarm the various pyrotechnics still aboard, about which Don O'Neill and Bill Ryan were telling you. As a matter of fact, the very last thing they do is to turn off the lights. Oddly enough, just as if you were leaving on vacation or leaving home, that's the last move. Turn off the electric power, the lights in the spacecraft. When they do that, the pyrotechnics presumably cannot fire again. However, they are further disarmed by the technicians who are just about to climb aboard the spacecraft, as you saw there. And so it was a 72-hour and 14-minute flight. It was beset by trouble from the very beginning, from the very concept of the flight, actually, because on February 28th, the prime pilots who were supposed to have made this flight, C and Bassett, were killed in a trainer plane crash as they were coming into the McDonnell plant in St. Louis. And Stafford and Cernan, as their backup men, were put into the flight instead. They've had their troubles getting aloft, as you know. Back on May 17th, they were supposed to go. There was difficulty then when the Atlas failed to put the Agena into orbit. And then they were supposed to go on May 31st, a one-day delay, because the Atlas wasn't quite ready for that flight. It finally got off 3 days later after another delay because of some trouble with a little 1-inch square transistor in the ground control system. When they got aloft, they found that the shroud had not dropped from the target vehicle, and they could not carry out docking as they had hoped. They had trouble with a fogging visor of Cernan's and some communications problems with his maneuvering unit that caused them to have to terminate the spacewalk a little bit early and not do all they'd planned. But they came back certainly to glory, coming down within 1.5 miles, and that did turn out to be official finally from Paul Haney II of the aircraft carrier Wasp for a successful recovery and another American flight in space. Our next space report at approximately 3:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, live coverage when astronauts Stafford and Cernan reappear on the Wasp to inspect their spacecraft. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News Space Center in New York.
The week in space, the reentry and recovery of Gemini 9. This is CBS.
Hundreds of members of the crew of the carrier Wasp gathered here on the hangar deck for a ceremony honoring the astronauts, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas P. Stafford, Lieutenant Commander Eugene Cernan, and also giving the astronauts an opportunity to honor the crew of this carrier for the recovery made earlier today in the Western Atlantic, a recovery that went off without a hitch, a recovery that featured one of the most wonderful sights in space and naval history, that of the spacecraft riding down directly in front of the carrier on a big orange parachute, floating slowly down through a light cloud cover and haze, and floating to a reasonably gentle landing on the waters of the Western Atlantic, and a recovery that came about very quickly. I can see now coming down the ladder from the captain's cabin, the Chief Master at Arms, Kenneth Everett, astronaut Stafford, followed by astronaut Cernan, Captain Gordon Hartley, a member of the NASA recovery team, its leader, John Stonecipher, the ship's executive officer, Commander J.B. Schaefer, has just called all those here on the hangar deck to attention, and here the party is coming to the stand. Admiral William Leonard, commander of the recovery forces in the Western Atlantic, Lieutenant Colonel Stafford, Lieutenant Commander Cernan shaking hands with Commander Schaefer, Captain Hartley, Captain J.C. Berriman, who is Chief of Staff on the Admiral's staff, John Stonecipher of NASA, and also on the platform are two sailors of the month, one and a seaman of the month.
Now, the purpose of this gathering
Commander
today,
Schaefer.
this festive gathering, I should say, is for the men of Wasp to meet the astronauts, and have the astronauts meet the men of Wasp. Now, to begin the festivities, we'll hear from our Carrier Division Commander, the Commander of the Task Group of Western Atlantic Recovery Forces, Admiral William N. Leonard.
Distinguished astronauts, Wasp people. Of course, it's a great pleasure to welcome the astronauts on board. Colonel Stafford and Commander Cernan have told me how happy they are to be aboard, but I tell you, we who've been out here waiting for them have a good claim on being happy too. We're mighty glad to have them with us. Now, the astronauts will be leaving the ship rather quickly after the festivities in the hangar bay here. But one of the things I did want to bring you up to date on is a small informal presentation that I made in the cabin mess a few minutes ago to Colonel Stafford. If you notice, he's wearing a small emblem on his right tunic, which indicates Command at Sea. It's the Command at Sea emblem. We felt it was appropriate for Colonel Stafford to be given this emblem. It is a sort of token of our esteem, also to indicate that we think he has certainly earned the right to show that he has commanded a craft at sea. This is the emblem that squadron commanders and ship commanders earn when they command at sea. Colonel Stafford has earned it commanding Gemini 9 on the high seas, on the Atlantic, all by himself. Now I shall turn this over to Captain Hartley.
That was Rear Admiral William Leonard, who was commander
Next we'll hear from our
14.
skipper, Captain Gordon E. Hartley.
Admiral Leonard, Colonel Stafford, Commander Cernan. I know all of you out there are more interested in hearing from our space guests than you are from me, so I'll make this brief. Would you gentlemen please stand up for just a moment?
Captain
I'm
Hartley
sure I
calls the
speak
astronauts to him.
for all of the crew of Wasp when I say that we in Wasp are indeed honored to have you gentlemen aboard today, particularly after that astoundingly accurate splashdown. This visit today, almost to the day, marks the Wasp's first anniversary for the introduction, our introduction into the Gemini program. Since 1 year ago tomorrow, they picked up their first spacecraft, Gemini 4. However, the most important thing we have here today, I believe, is that we have the first repeat performance. If you'll notice on this arm, we have a hash mark. And in addition to that hash mark, we've made a notation on the ship's plaque that I will give him to indicate that he's a repeat performer. Just a second. You know, we didn't know whether to put an oak leaf cluster or a star on this, so we just settled and put a bar below it indicating a second award. Would you do us the honor of accepting this as a token of our esteem?
Captain Hartley presenting a ship's plaque to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Stafford.
Commander Cernan, I have no hash mark for you since this is your first visit, but we are indeed delighted to have you aboard, and I hope that we may have a chance to add a hash mark on your ship's plaque. Would you accept this as a token of our esteem and in memory of the events of the day? Thank you very much. No, stay right where you are. These plaques and the patches we managed to get sewn on their tunics make them honorary members of the Wasp crew. And I know these people out here would like to hear from both of you your personal tale of your 3 days in space. Gentlemen, please.
Thank you, Admiral Leonard, Captain Hartley, officers and men of the Wasp. Believe me, it's really great to be back in the greatest ship of the Navy, in my opinion. It's real good. I am also very honored that all you people awarded me this hash mark for being on board the Wasp twice. In fact, it was a really great feeling that when the parachute opened, right there was a helicopter alongside of us, and we had no longer hit the water than a couple of the divers were right in the water with us. So the support that you have given the program out here has been utterly fantastic.